forgive as you have been forgiven.
EWTN, your Lenten companion.
Have you ever heard someone say that Christians have committed some of the worst atrocities in history? Well, G.K. Chesterton says that it's very right to rebuke our religion for falling short of our own standards and ideals. But it's absurd to pretend that Christianity fell lower than the other religions, the ones that profess the very opposite standards and ideals. In other words, the savages and heathens have had some pretty savage and heathen ideas and practices. Chesterton says the Christian has not been worse than the heathen in an absolute sense. The Christian is only worse because it's his business to be better.
Spend more time with the Apostle of Common Sense. Visit chesterton.org for more information and go to EWTNRC.com to discover more books and programs written and inspired by G.K. Chesterton.
On the next Beacon of Truth, talking about the third Sunday in Lent and Soulful Psalm 78.
I'm Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, and I invite you to join me for Beacon of Truth.
Spreading the good news of salvation.
This is EWTN Radio.
It's called to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for David, 833-288-3986. Lines are open right now. We are wide open waiting for your phone call, 833-288-EWTN. You know, EWTN has been bringing you the Holy Rosary here on the radio twice each day. We've been doing it for over 30 years now. You can tune in every morning at 5:30 a.m. Eastern for Mother Angelica leading the Rosary, and every evening at 9:30 p.m. Eastern for Father Benedict Groeschel leading the Rosary, only on EWTN Radio. Just got a question from MS watching us on YouTube today. MS says, my son is being mocked for being the only Catholic in his group. The group is Baptists ages 10 to 15. He wants to respond, but he's worried he will offend others in the group. What is the best way for him to respond?
Wow, that's a really good question because a lot depends on your son's personality.
It does.
And the rapport that he has with his peers. So, you know, if he's a real ham with a great sense of humor, it would be lovely if he could kind of throw it back at them in a jocular way, right? To show that it's water off his back. He doesn't really care, and he can give it as well as take it. However, if that's in a kind of sullen, resentful mode, it can really backfire. So you've got to have the talent, and that is just a matter of talent, right? To pull that sort of thing off.
Yep.
Otherwise, I would say to be humble and to smile and to laugh it off and not whatever he does, not in a vindictive way to go after his peers, right? The idea is he's got to be the better man, and these are, we're talking 10 to 15-year-olds. I mean, these guys don't know anything, and they're just inheriting the prejudices of their parents, and they're not amenable to correction, right? But he's not gonna be able to verbally contradict them. However, he can be the contradiction to their stereotype.
Yes.
Right. When they deride Catholics as always being like X or always doing Y, he can not be X and not do Y. And then that eventually maybe not while he knows them in grammar school, but one day they may look back and be like, I really treated that guy badly and said some things that turned out not to have been true. In fact, they weren't true of him.
Seemed to me there was an exemplar of that when you were in college.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes. I had a college buddy and hallmate in my dorm named Dave. And Dave was publicly Catholic, demonstrably Catholic, wore a crucifix everywhere. But he was not pretentious or showy or pushy about his faith at all. He would talk about it, and he was clearly proud to be Catholic and happy to be Catholic. He especially liked talking about his Jesuit high school and how much he respected the priests and how much it had meant to him. But he wasn't proselytizing it. He was just sharing his life.
Yeah. And only when asked.
Yeah, and only when asked, right? Exactly. And we would go out, and all the other kids would get sloppy drunk and chase girls and things like that, and like college kids do when they live in New Orleans. And he would, he'd have a beer and shoot some pool and have fun. He wasn't a stick in the mud, but he wasn't like that. and it was, but he didn't look down on people. He wasn't prudish. He didn't judge.
Mm-hmm.
He would kind of laugh when people got ridiculous, but he would just like, well, there's so-and-so being ridiculous again, so he wasn't aloof. He wasn't aloof at all, but he wasn't into what he shouldn't be into.
And that goes a long way, doesn't it?
And years later I look back and I thought that was a really good witness, because it made a good impression on me about his Catholic identity and how it had made him a better human being, basically.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, here you can remember all that stuff that happened decades ago.
Oh, yeah, 35 years ago.
Pretty awesome. Well, there you go. And MS, we hope that is helpful for you. Thanks for watching us today on YouTube. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN, beginning with Debbie. Debbie's in Louisville, listening on the great Holy Family Radio, one of our longtime radio partners here at EWTN. Hello, Debbie. What's on your mind today?
Yes,
Yeah.
Hello?
Hi.
Yeah. Hi, Debbie.
Hi. I'm calling to find out. I'm 73. My guy friend is 81. We've been together for about 12 years. We don't live together. In fact, he lives in another county, I should say. Both of us are a widow and a widower, and we do not want to get married in a civil ceremony because of financial reasons, etc. Will the church marry us in a spiritual ceremony without having the civil contract?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So the Catholic Church absolutely would be happy to celebrate your wedding, but they would require you to be civilly married as well, right? Because the Catholic marriage is, of course, a sacrament of the Church, but it's grounded in a natural institution, which is there not just for the benefit of the spouses, but for the good of the civilization. It's a social institution. It's the bedrock of society, you often hear people say, and that it really is. And the Church thinks that it is right, that it is appropriate, that the state should also regulate marriage law and family law. It is in the best interest of everybody that marriage be recognized by all human beings as an important institution. And so you can't have a Catholic wedding and not also have the wedding recognized at the civil level. Yeah.
Okay. Debbie, thanks so much for your call. Glad that you're listening there in Louisville. Appreciate that. And that opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. We have 3 lines open right now, 833-288-3986. Call to communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Let's go to Long Island now and talk with Nina, listening on Sirius XM, channel 130. Hey, Nina, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
I love listening to your show.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes. What is the difference between a venial sin and a mortal sin? And does a venial sin need to be confessed?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So St. John in his first epistle tells us that there's sin that leads to death and there's sin that does not lead to death, and thus the distinction. St. James also distinguishes grave sins from those peccadillos that we all commit on a daily basis. So that's a biblical distinction. Right?
Okay.
And essentially the mortal sins are those that concern a very grave matter, some grave offense against divine or human dignity, that one commits with impunity, knowing that it's wrong, and doing it willfully without compulsion. Like, nobody's put a gun to your head. You've chosen this activity, and you know it's wrong, and you ought not to do it, and it really does concern a grave matter. And so, let me draw some kinds of distinctions here. Now, the Church refrains from ever saying, here's the list of mortal sins, here's the list of venial sins. And it does so for good reason, okay? But I'll give you some examples, maybe some benchmarks. Your great aunt asks you what you think of her hat.
Danger.
Right, and you don't answer honestly. Like, don't even know if that rises to the level of a sin, but if it is, it's certainly a peccadillo. It's not anything serious. Versus, say, swearing a false oath and giving false testimony in court in a capital case.
Whoa.
Right. That would be like it's on the face of it obviously grave.
Sure.
Right. So the nature of the thing is the same. If you've prevaricated, you've told a lie, you've told an untruth, you've sought to deceive in each case, right? One of them is clearly a grave violation of human dignity. One of them is maybe an ill-considered attempt to spare human dignity. Right? Really easy to see. Sometimes, of course, the dividing line might be a little bit grayer. Where exactly do you draw that line? I don't know that there's a hard and fast way to do that. If in doubt, go to confession. That's the simple answer. If in doubt, go to confession. But that's the difference. So a mortal sin is one that concerns a grave matter about which you are informed, because see, you can commit a sin in ignorance and then it's not really imputed to you, right? And one that's not under compulsion. If you're under some grave compulsion where you don't really have freedom in the matter, then it's not a sin either. And what kind of compulsion somebody might be in? Well, let's say someone loses their reason, right? Well, if you don't have your reason, then you're not capable of rationally deliberating. You're not capable of making a free choice.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
And there could be other situations, as well. So that's the distinction. Do you have to go to confession for venial sins? The answer is no, you do not. Although you can confess venial sins in the confessional. It can be edifying to do so, but it's not necessary.
Okay. Nina, thanks so much for your call from Long Island. Call to communion here on EWTN. Still time for your phone call at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Or if you wish, text the letters EWTN to 58177. So let's go to Patrick now in San Antonio, listening on the Great Guadalupe Network. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today, sir?
Yes. Are priests, nuns, deacons that are excommunicated, are they still considered Catholics?
Yes, they are. Thank you for the question, by the way. They are. I mean, here's an analogy. Are convicted felons that have U.S. citizenship still U.S. citizens after they've been convicted? Yes, of course they are.
Yeah.
Of course they are. And so they're entitled to all the due process and all the rest of it that they would, that anybody else would have. And when they get out of jail, then they recover at least, some of their civil rights and liberties and so forth. They're still Americans. Excommunicated Catholics are still Catholics. They're just Catholics that are barred from participation in the sacraments and other church ministries.
Okay. Patrick, thanks so much for your call. Call to communion on this Thursday afternoon here on EWTN. David, I got to tell you something kind of funny yesterday that happened. As you know, Rich Jesse handles our social media. So he's keeping an eye on YouTube. He's keeping an eye on Facebook and, comments that come in. And somebody commented either on Facebook or YouTube, I think it was Facebook, that said, that Tom Price, whenever he goes to a male caller, he'll say, what's on your mind, sir? But he doesn't say that to women. He doesn't say, what's on your mind, ma'am?
I never noticed.
Well, that's actually by design, because I've noticed over the years some women do not want to be called ma'am. It's like, are you talking about my grandmother?
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
That's why I'm keeping it generic.
Well, in the South, as Hank Williams Jr. said,
yes,
we say grace and we say ma'am, and if you ain't into that, you know the rest of the song.
I do know the rest of the song.
But outside of the South, I've met people who take genuine offense if you say sir and ma'am.
Yeah.
And
downright umbrage.
Yeah, exactly. And I grew up when I was a kid. My parents said, anybody, if you're a kid, anybody over the age of 20, basically, you say sir and ma'am to them.
Yeah,
right?
well, of course.
And I remember when I had kids, I had a friend of mine who was not anywhere near the South to come to my house, and I was all right, say sir to Mr. So and so, and he's like, don't don't do that.
It's hilarious. Very good. So maybe I need to mend my evil ways. I don't know. But anyway, here is a question now that we just got from Ireland. This is from Martha, who says, I am watching you on TV with my granny here in Leitrim in Ireland. I was wondering if you could tell us how a baby can be born with sin.
Yeah, thanks. Well, babies are not born with actual sin. That's the teaching of the Catholic Church.
Okay.
When we talk about original sin, and we do speak about babies having original sin, the Catechism of the Catholic Church says that original sin is not sin properly speaking, it is sin only by analogy. Right? What we're really talking about, and so it's almost it's a terminological problem here. What original sin means is that the child does not have the grace of God. Does not have the grace of God, which is transmitted through baptism, but has no personal guilt. There's nothing nothing for the child to make atonement for. There's nothing for the child to repent of, right? Has no personal fault, which is why Catholics have always believed that unbaptized babies don't deserve the pains of hell. Now they've dealt with that in different ways. So medieval theologians imagined that they went to limbo. I think most modern Catholics imagine they probably just go straight to heaven. But everybody's agreed that they can't go to hell because they haven't done anything to deserve it.
Okay. Very good. Thanks so much for that question. Here's one now from Larry. How do you know that the cradle Catholic who has converted to Baptist is possibly, quote, Jesus for you rather than the other way around?
How do I know that the cradle Catholic who's become a Baptist is Jesus for me?
I guess it says is possibly, in quotes, Jesus for you. I'm not real clear on the meaning of that.
The phrase is ambiguous, so let me play with a couple different possible interpretations.
Okay.
If you mean, should I regard, what if I meet an ex-Catholic who's become a Baptist who treats me like Christ?
Okay.
Right? Treats me with dignity.
Okay.
Another possible interpretation would be, Christ said, "Whatever you do for the least of these, my brethren, you do for me." Maybe someone to whom I treat well for Jesus' sake. Either one of those.
Yeah.
Their ex-Catholic status, I don't think has any bearing on that question at all. Right? If somebody treats me in a Christ-like fashion and they reflect Jesus to me, well, good.
That's a good thing.
It's a good thing. The Catholic Church doesn't say that non-Catholics can't have grace. We think they can have grace, right? Similarly, we need to not be discriminating in the way we show love and charity to others, whether they're Catholics or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Larry, thanks so much for your email today. By the way, if you would like to send us an email for a future show, we're always glad to get those emails. ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. And if you would, please, if you don't mind, and if it's possible, try to keep those email questions as short as possible. That way, that gives us a little more freedom to get as many emails in as we possibly can. So again, the address, ctc@ewtn.com. What's the phrase there, David? Brevity is the soul of wit. Mm-hmm. Isn't that it? All right, very good. In a moment, back to the phones for you at 833-288-EWTN if you have a question for Dr. David Anders. 833-288-3986. Call to communion on this Thursday afternoon here on EWTN. Do stay with us.
You think it, he asks it.
Your Excellency, the final document of that synod said the question of a female diaconate remains an open question. This has gone back and forth. The Pope said no, and then they had a study group, and then Cardinal Fernandez came out and said they were looking into it, but it was a closed question. What was your reaction when you saw that?
Find that out and more. The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. Tonight, 8 Eastern on EWTN Television and Radio.
This is a Did You Know moment with Sandra McDevitt. Did you know how much Don Bosco's mother, Margaret, helped care for his boys? Not only did she come when asked, but sold her bridal outfit, made her best dress into vestments, her linens were used for altar cloths, and her gold chain decorated the tabernacle. No better ending for her possessions than for the care of poor children, is what she answered when asked. Had she more trousseaux to give? By the time of her death, she was cooking for 150 boys, nursing them when sick, washing and mending clothes, all the while praying her beads. Like this, Hail Mary, full of grace. John, fetch some wood. The Lord is with thee. Take that pot off the stove. Blessed art thou among women. Come here, your trousers are torn. I'm Sandra McDevitt for EWTN Radio.
This is Dr. Greg Poptrack from More to Life.
This is Father Joseph Mary.
Aloha, this is Bear Wozniak.
This is Ryan Penny. The most trusted Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
I'm Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. Join me for Beacon of Truth today at 4 p.m. Eastern.
On the next Beacon of Truth, talking about the third Sunday in Lent and Soulful Psalm 78.
Now back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Glad you're with us for the Thursday afternoon edition of Call to Communion on EWTN. Lines are open for you at 833-288-EWTN. If you call right now, there's a very, very good chance we can get your question on today's program. 833-288-3986. Quick reminder here, if you're listening to us in Nebraska, your EWTN radio station needs to hear from you next week, and I mean it. Spirit Catholic Radio with 19 stations in Nebraska and also East Central Wisconsin. They're going to be airing their spring carathon starting on Monday. So, if you're listening in Nebraska, East Central Wisconsin, or anywhere really, please remember to support your Catholic radio station. Got to pay the bills. That's why we do it. Mother Angelica, the way she set this network up many, many years ago, is that we are glad to provide free programming, free, absolutely free, for any station that wants it. All you have to do is pay the local bills, the internet bills, your local payroll, take care of the transmitter and all that kind of local stuff. And the church would call that subsidiarity. Am I right?
That's what it calls it.
Take care of those local things at the local level. So we're very blessed to be on over 400 radio stations now, but those stations cannot stay on the air without your prayerful support of them. And if you don't mind, please keep EWTN in mind as well. Here's an email now from Roseanne, who says, why did Jesus speak in parables to tell a story and not want everyone to understand them?
Ooh. My favorite question. I love this. So, Jesus does tell us in Matthew 13 that the reason he speaks in parables is because he wants to be obscure. He does not want to be plainly understood. And here's how I understand that. That is, this is my own idiosyncratic take, and you may certainly argue with me and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. When you look at the paradigm of the parable, and sort of the paradigm case would be the parable that Nathan tells David in the book of 2 Samuel, when David is sinned by committing adultery with Bathsheba and then killing Uriah the Hittite. Nathan goes in and tells David a parable. It's the story of the rich man who has lots of sheep and the poor man who's got one sheep, and the poor man loves his one sheep, and, they play Monopoly together and sleep in the same bed and, drink tea, and they're just big buddies. And the rich man has friends that come, and he wants to serve those guys mutton or lamb. So instead of taking one sheep from his own flock, he takes the poor man's sheep, kills the sheep, leaves the man bereaved and aggrieved, and serves the sheep to his rich neighbors. And David hears the story, believes it's real, that's a historical narrative, and he gets indignant and says the man who has done this should die. And then Nathan comes back and says, well, David, you're that man. And then all of a sudden, then David's cut to the heart because he recognizes the analogy. Now, you ask yourself the question, did Nathan tell the parable because he wanted to teach David the abstract moral lesson that it is wrong to commit adultery and murder? No. David already knew that it was wrong to commit adultery and murder. The point of the parable wasn't to teach a general moral message. It was to put the moral message in a cryptic way so that David wouldn't see the implicit rebuke, would own the conclusion, and then you pull the wool away at the last minute, and David realizes that he's condemned himself. So it's the point of the thing is not to teach a lesson, but to provoke an insight into his own moral character. Had he gone the direct approach and just said, David, you're a bad guy because you committed adultery and murder, he might have gotten the same treatment that John the Baptist got from Herod. Right. I'll show you, Mr. Prophet, where you're going to end up. But as it is, by using the parable, he's able to get to elicit David's self-condemnation. Right. I think that's what's going on. So you take something like the parable of the Good Samaritan, for example. Is the point of the Good Samaritan parable to teach the abstract lesson, be kind to strangers? I don't think so, because the Judeans already knew that. The book of Deuteronomy was very clear. It says, you guys were strangers in Egypt, so you need to treat strangers well. Like that, they knew that thing. Yeah. The point of the parable was rather, like Nathan to David, to get them to see that they weren't, in fact, being kind to strangers. That their bigotry and their prejudices were impeding the flow of love.
Sure.
And to get them to have that revelation about themselves, right? I think that's the point, or at least one of the major points of Jesus' teaching in parables.
Okay. And thank you so much, Roseanne, for your email. Let's go to the phones now at 833-288-EWTN for Maria, a first-time caller in Independence, Missouri, home of Harry Truman, if I recall correctly, listening on the great Catholic Radio Network. Hello, Maria. What's on your mind today?
Hello. I have the unfortunate experience of working with a Satanist, and we clashed badly over his use of the name of Jesus Christ in the workplace. I told him how offended I was and all that. My question is there any point where Catholics are not obligated anymore to exercise charity towards someone who is hell-bent on blaspheming the name of Jesus and intentionally going out of his way to offend Catholics and Christians?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question.
Interesting choice of the word hell-bent.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So just as an aside, before I get into the question, one time, Tom, you may remember this. It's been several years. We had a Satanist call this show.
Yep.
But it wasn't to attack the Catholic Church. It was actually very interesting. He called and said, well, I'm a practicing Satanist. And in essence, it isn't doing it for me anymore. And in particular, he was having pangs of conscience and wanted to improve his moral life, and believe it or not, found that Satanism was not a very good vehicle for improving his moral condition.
Shocking.
Right? Wanted to know if the Catholic Church could do a better job. So, my guess is someone that goes in for this kind of thing has got, they've got issues. They've got issues. They've got unresolved conflicts.
Yeah.
They've got, there's brokenness, there's woundedness there that would lead them into this kind of thing. And that should elicit our sympathy, honestly. We should see that as evidence of, this guy's got problems, and my heart goes out to him. I don't really appreciate the way he's treating me or my faith, but, he's a broken guy. The church has some rules, has some principles for when you admonish people. Admonishing the sinner is a spiritual work of mercy, but does that mean you admonish everyone for everything? And what the church says is there's like 3 criteria that you can bring to bear. The first one is it grave. Well, taking the Lord's name in vain is grave. Blaspheming is grave. So that would check. That one would count. The second one is the person likely to listen to your admonition. And you've already answered that question. The answer to that question is no. And Jesus talks about this. He says, do not throw pearls before swine. So if you think I'm wasting my breath on this guy, you're probably wasting your breath on this guy.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then the third criteria is, granted that maybe such a person might listen to an admonition, are you the best person to give it? And in this instance, I'd say no, right? Because he probably gets a kick out of poking the Catholic. I don't expect this. What would be appropriate is if somebody from HR came down and said, hey, knock it off. We don't poke other people in their religion around here. If you want to behave that way, you go find yourself another job. That's the appropriate person to make the rebuke.
Sure.
Okay. Probably not you, because you don't have any teeth. Like, you can't carry through on it. Now the question about, do you have to show charity? Well, so I don't think you serve anything by being vindictive. It might be, the best thing is just to avoid this character if possible. If you can't avoid, there are some tools of effective communication that I think are very consistent with Christian charity and turn out to be very effective at disarming this kind of aggression. The principles are the same. You'll find different descriptions. There are 2 modern therapists that I really like who have different versions of essentially the same approach. One of them is the cognitive behavioral therapist David Burns, who talks about what he calls the 5 secrets of effective communication. And they are as follows. The first one is you disarm the person by finding something that you can agree with that they've said. And you may think I don't agree with what they said. But you find something you can agree with, some aspect of their whatever that you can affirm, right? So that you're validating them as a human being, right? Maybe not all their criticisms, right?
Yeah.
If somebody attacks the Catholic Church, and I'm very quick in this show and other contexts, if somebody says, the Catholic Church is just filled with pedophile priests and child abuse and crusades and inquisitions and all kinds of injustices. Well, I'm going to say, we've had pedophile priests and inquisitions and crusades and all kinds of injustices. I'm with you on that. Yep. What's your next complaint? Because at that point, you're not fighting back. They kind of lost their thunder. When you agree with them, right?
Yeah.
And then the second tool is empathy. You put yourself in their shoes, and see if you can echo back to this person what they're thinking and what you think they're feeling, and get them to validate that you've understood them correctly. Right?
Yes.
So let me get this straight. You're telling me that the Catholic Church is filled with pedophile priests and inquisitors. That's exactly what I'm saying. And that not trying to put words in your mouth. You tell me that makes you mad. Oh, yeah, that makes me really mad. Okay, I think I can appreciate that. Again, it's hard to argue with that. you can make inquiries, like showing that you take an interest in the person. Tell me more. Like, what is it precisely that bugs you about this? Get them to go into more depth. Then they feel respected. You compliment them. Well, it's pretty astute of you to pick this up, right? I appreciate that about you. You've got a sensitive conscience. It's kind of a stretch in the case of a Satanist, but like you're trying to find something to make them feel validated.
Sure. And
then if you state your own feelings, you put them in first person. You don't say you've done this thing to make me mad. You say I feel sad. That this is how you feel, and gee whiz, that makes me sad, right?
Yeah.
You can express yourself, but do it in a way that's not threatening. Another fellow named Xavier Amador is another therapist who this is an easy one to remember because it's an acronym, LEAP, L-E-A-P. Listen, empathize, agree, and partner. Same kind of idea, right? You listen to them actively, find something you can empathize with, find something you can agree with, find some point of commonality where you could work together, And, you see the same idea. The idea is how to be a disarming kind of person that's affirming, lets them feel validated, right? And I think in the case of somebody who's real angry and vindictive, they're trying to get a rise out of you.
Yeah.
Right? And when you just don't play along, it kind of steals their thunder.
Sure.
My mother was a Spanish teacher, and she hung out with this lady that was a Spanish teacher, and a really disarming and lovely person. And they were in Spain one time on a trip, and this kind of rude teenager forgive me if I get the Spanish wrong, Pedro will correct me, sees this lady, and he says like, hola fea. That's hey, ugly person, right? Okay, hola fea. and she shoots right back and says, hola guapo. Hola, you handsome guy.
Wow.
And she wasn't gonna take the bait,
Yeah.
I got that right, didn't I? Okay, Pedro says I got that right.
Very good.
And that's like, you can't fight that,
No,
it's
you
so
can't.
beautiful. And you do that enough, and they just kind of lose their thunder around you.
There you go. Maria, we hope that's helpful for you. Hopefully some of those ideas will bear fruit for your situation. Thanks for checking in from Independence, Missouri. Call to Communion here on EWTN, one of our fabulous weekend programs, Divine Intimacy Radio. That's at Sunday mornings, 6:30 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN. This week, Dan and Stephanie Burke show you how to surrender to divine providence. Do check it out Sunday morning, 6:30 a.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN Radio. Let's get to this question now from Collins, who says, Dr. Anders, what is the problem that Christ came to solve? If it's the problem of sin, the problem still apparently looks unsolved because sin has even probably become worse compared to when Christ hasn't come. I've been trying to understand the essence of what Christ did on the cross, and the pieces are not fitting together. I'm still feeling there's something I'm missing that is making Christ's death look superfluous. And this is a topic people hardly discuss these days. What was the problem, and in what way has Christ's coming solved the problem? Also, please, do you have a book recommendation where I can further study this? Thanks for all you do, Collins.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So, St. Irenaeus gives the most pithy and approachable and my favorite answer to this question. St. Irenaeus says that what we lost in Adam, we regain in Christ, namely to be in the likeness and image of God, right? Does that mean that every human being is instantly transformed into the likeness and image of God again through regenerating grace, on the instant of the ascension? No, right? But that Christ has put means into the world, instruments into the world, the effective use of which can progressively transform a person into the likeness and image of God, right? Can restore that effaced divine image. We are like God, or we're created to be like God, in the proper use of our rationality, our intellect, and the proper disposition of our will, which is essentially towards the love of God and neighbor, right? And you got to have both of those. You have to properly functioning intellect, right? You can have like enthusiasm without brains, and it can be quite ugly. You can be a brain on a stick and have no charity, and that's quite ugly too, right? You got to have both aspects. And you say, well, I don't see evidence of this in the world. Well, I do. I do see evidence of it. When you look at, say, the supernatural charity of Mother Teresa, for example, right? I mean, it's kind of demonstrative. I mean, I've known people who were pretty sharp critics of Mother Teresa who conceded that she was personally an extremely charitable person, right? So but you just can't take that away from her, right? At the sort of the societal level, I'm deeply conscious that the world is very different today, ethically, than it was, say, during the era of paganism, particularly in respect for the least among us, for the poor, the marginalized, the lame, the handicapped, the outcast, something that the pagan world did not recognize as a value, and that today allows things like the UN Declaration of Human Rights to be widely, not universally, but widely accepted throughout the world, right? A course of events that I think probably could not have happened apart from the spread of Christianity throughout the world. And a host of subsidiary institutions, and one that I've talked about, think about jurisprudence in the West. Things that you take for granted about a fair trial, like, trials by jury and the presumption of innocence and the preponderance of evidence and the standard of reasonable doubt. All of these things are outgrowths of Christian moral theology and the doctrine of the conscience. Do you think that the judicial system in the Mongol Empire worried for 1 second about the standard of reasonable doubt?
Nope.
I don't think they did, right? But this is an outgrowth within Christian jurisprudence, particularly to protect the conscience of jurors, right? Because they have a doctrine of conscience, right? And I mean, the institutions of benevolence throughout the world, hospitals and public education and all the rest of it. I mean, you could go on all day, and there are plenty of people who've done that. Tom Holland's book Dominion, Tom Wood's book, How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, and others. Christopher Dawson, the famous Harvard historian of Catholicism, writes a lot about Catholicism and its impact on culture. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's demonstrably helped, all right? Mm-hmm. And in the case of individuals, it has the capacity to bring some to extreme levels of heroic charity, i.e. sanctity, i.e. sainthood. Not all of us get there. All right, but the opportunity has been placed in the world, the ideal's been set before us, and the means have been provided. And in terms of the death of Christ, so the death of Christ works variously, all right? And let's start at one biblical idea that I think is easily accessible. Jesus dies the death of a martyr. I think that's quite evident. Whatever else you may say about the death of Christ, it is true that he dies the death of a martyr, right? He sticks to his principles, right? His determination to follow what he understands to be the will of God, regardless of convention or circumstance or convenience. And he could have renounced that path. He didn't, and he died for his pains. U2 even wrote a song about it.
That's right.
Right? In the name of love, right?
That's right.
And all these sort of Christiform figures throughout history that imitate Jesus and his sacrifice. And that's what that song is about, right?
How about that?
And so it's effective. Right? When Martin Luther King, millennia later, leads the civil rights movement, he appeals to the example of Christ, to the example of Christian conscience and Christian martyrdom and redemptive suffering to bring about social change. And he's just one of thousands and thousands of people throughout history who have materially changed their circumstances and those around them by pursuing Christ's example of martyrdom, for love. St. Peter tells us in his epistle that Christ died to give us an example to follow. Now, the New Testament also tells us that in a way that we can't fully understand, that when you're baptized, you become a member of Christ, that you're somehow incorporated into Jesus' act of self-sacrifice. And that, he didn't just die a martyr, he also rose victoriously from the dead. And that vindication of Christ's life, that reanimation, that resurrection, that glorification, it somehow imparts a power to your life where you can die to yourself and die to your old ways and take up this powerful overcoming life. That's a New Testament teaching. The New Testament also presents Jesus' death as a sacrifice of atonement. A sacrifice is something that we offer to God, to the honor of God. And here I think we go back to the idea of the martyrdom, and we ask whether a martyrdom, for a noble goal is objectively praiseworthy, whether it's meritorious, whether it ought to be lauded. Well, I think our collective intuition is yes. Otherwise we wouldn't have every urban center in America wouldn't have a Martin Luther King Jr. avenue or street.
Yep.
Right. We wouldn't have these monuments in D.C. to fallen war heroes and the like, if we didn't think that kind of sacrifice was worthy. And what the New Testament says is that it's not only us who honors it, but God also honors such a sacrifice. That's another word for merit, right?
Uh-huh.
And that the reward, is not just admiration from men, but grace from God that gets shared with the whole body of Christ.
Collins, thank you so much for your email. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Christy's watching us on YouTube today. Christy says, how can I respond to a Baptist's statement that, quote, God's wrath must be satisfied and sin must be punished regarding the doctrine of penal substitution? Thanks, Christy.
That's easy. You say, no, it doesn't. Who says so? No, it doesn't.
This sounds very Monty Python here. No, it doesn't.
I mean, I'm serious. I dispute that. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I mean, look, first of all, let's just, before we get into Scripture, let me ask you this question. If your son disobeys you and plays baseball in the house and breaks a window, do you think that you have no choice, that you are compelled by some metaphysical necessity to torture him for eternity in consequence? No, that's absurd, all right? Do you feel compelled to smack him around for a full afternoon? No, that's absurd. You don't feel that, all right? Would you feel like it would be the duty of a loving parent to say something more like, okay, kiddo, I'm disappointed in you. Here's a dustpan and a broom. Go to work, clean up the mess. And if you don't cooperate, well, then I might have to go in your room and collect that Nintendo or that game, PlayStation or that whatever, because I love and care about you, right? Is this, hopefully, I think we would regard any parent that thought the appropriate response was to fly into a rage and then to beat it out of the kid until that rage was satisfied would be a very deficient parent. But the one who was motivated by love and charity to reform the will of this individual and to help them see that they had hurt other people and to grow and to become a more humane person, that approach to discipline would be far superior, much more superior to the indignant parent who feels like he's caught up in some compulsion to simply exercise his wrath on a subject, right? And yet somehow you want to apply that concept to God and consider that's a more dignified way to view God than the loving parent who seeks the moral instruction of the child instead of the vindictive, so-and-so who wants to take it out of his hide, right? But that's the view that your Baptist friend has of God. Now, again, in the human case, am I compelled? Is it a necessity that I take out my pound of flesh on this kid? Absolutely not. Nothing compels me to do that. I don't have to. I can refrain from doing that. I can just forgive by fiat. I forgive you. There, it's done. It's my choice. I can forgive however I want to forgive.
That's right.
If I want to sell it for a price, I can sell it for a price. I'll forgive you, but only if. All right? But I think we'd all think that'd be kind of a poor forgiveness.
Yeah.
Right? What if I had to buy my Father's forgiveness?
Ugh.
How ugly. How ugly.
Yeah.
How ugly. It's freely given.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tell you what, I've never wanted to do my Father's will, and I'm talking about my human father, more than when I felt like I was freely forgiven for love's sake, not because he was going to beat it out of me otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Same thing with God. But I also think that Scripture itself does not say this thing that you claim. It does not say this. It does not teach this. And it is not the model of the atonement given in the Bible. I just explained the biblical doctrine of the atonement, right? This idea of penal substitution is a Calvinist invention of the 16th century. It is not found in Scripture. Isaiah 53 notwithstanding. The one passage they love to quote is the one in Isaiah 53 where he was afflicted by God, punished, and the punishment laid on him was, brought us peace. They don't attend to the context. What Isaiah says is that we regarded Jesus as if he were afflicted by God. And it is undeniable that he was punished, but punished by men. So we acknowledge that the atonement of the death of Christ reconciles us to God. We deny that it is in fact due to God's hatred or wrath. It rather seemed that way to Jesus' contemporaries, but they were all deceived.
Wow. Well, there you go, Christy. Thanks so much for watching us on YouTube this afternoon. And that's going to wrap it up for us, but we're going to be back here to the same microphones tomorrow. Dr. David Andrews, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tom.
We do it Monday through Friday right here on EWTN Radio at 2 p.m. Eastern. Check out the podcast anytime you wish by going to EWTN.com. Click on the little radio box that you see at the top of the page. Then once you're there on the radio homepage, look for the words Podcast Central. You'll see that at the top of the page, kind of close to the right margin there. And click on that, you'll be good to go. You see over 100 great podcasts from the programs we produce, like this one, and our partners all over the world. On behalf of our fantastic team, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. Thank you for joining us. See you tomorrow on the Friday edition of Call to Communion. Be sure to stick around for Open Line Thursday with Father Gerald. God bless.
The most original Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
Hello, Journey Home family. Next time, we'll welcome Tish Oxen.